diet levels result in suboptimal body functioning, leading to health issues, and in most part, cardiovascular diseases or CVD may catch us unawares. This is something that can be fatal if ignored or not treated well. We all know that there is an indispensable relationship between health and what we eat. When we talk of CVD, there must be some foods, their quantities and frequencies, etc., that can have positive effect on heart health. Let us hear from Dr. Nilanjana Singh, our esteemed speaker today, all about diet and CVD. I welcome you all once again to our webinar titled CVD and Diet. Now I call upon Ms. Akansha Kapoor to introduce Dr. Nilanjana Singh to the audience and initiate the webinar. Akansha.
A very good afternoon to all present here. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Nilanjana Singh, registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. She has over 30 years of extensive clinical experience at AIIMS, Sitaram Bhartiya Research Institute, the Diabetes Foundation Delhi, and PSRI Hospital, where she founded and headed the dietist facility for more than 20 years. As a clinical nutritionist, Singh has been invited to speak at several national and international conferences. She has also been closely involved in creating awareness around dietary management for gastroenterological, renal, and neurological conditions. She has been associated with the WHO and FSSAI as part of their committees and projects for nutrition and health. She contributed to framing the Diet and IBD Guidelines 2019 as a member of the Asian Working Group. Singh has more than 7 years of nutrition and health education teaching experience at the University of Delhi. She is an invited faculty resource person for various programs at schools, colleges, and corporates. She has also been a weekly health columnist for the Morning Standard and the Indian Express for many years. And she continues to write regularly for several national dailies, numerous digital platforms, and her nutrition newsletter, Diet Matters. She has written various books and all have been widely acclaimed. Nilanjana Singh serves on the advisory board of some of the top websites of health and nutrition. In the past, she has run an online health portal for several years with some of India's leading medical experts offering free medical advice. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. I now request Nilanjana Singh to please take over.
Thank you so much, Akanksha and Dr. Prachi, for having invited me today to be part of your program on health and hygiene, which I believe you have very regularly been doing. And thank you also for helping me select the topic. When you told me to write about cholesterol, I thought that I should talk about CVD, but I do not know if that's a topic of interest to the students. I think mostly they are students today joining the program. Is that right?
Probably yes, but since they are online, so their parents also must be sitting with them. So this way, I believe, it's the family that is being benefited by this.
Okay. So that's good. So we have all age groups with us. So let me not waste any time. I know that attention spans are very, very small because we are always sitting in front of the screen now. So can I share my presentation? You enable that. I'll just share it. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little overview. This is a very vast topic. Cardiovascular disease sort of encompasses many diseases together. It could be coronary heart diseases of the vessels in the periphery, near the heart. It could be hypertension, it could be stroke. So it's a vast area to cover. But let me try and give you an overview of what actually is the status today and what we can do as citizens and how we can make ourselves more aware about this condition. We know that cardiovascular disease is a major cause of disability and death, and more so in the Asian region and in India. But there are many myths regarding it, and I hope that during the course of my talk, I should dispel some of them. But I think there's a question answer session post my talk. So if I fail to cover something, you're free to ask me those questions. So in my practice, what I've noticed that the younger age group seems to think that it's okay. You don't have to worry about heart disease and cardiovascular disease when you're young. And it's something which old people need to worry about, and it's tried only at 40. But let me tell you that we as Indians are predisposed to this disease at a much younger age, and therefore we need to be careful. And in fact, as early as 10 years, there are signs of cardiovascular disease setting in. So it's never too late to begin, and it's always the right time. Whenever you think you can make changes, do it. Don't think it's too late or too early. It is the right time. The other myth that I feel is very, very rampant is that women are protected from heart disease. That's true up to a certain age. Because of the estrogen levels, you are protected. But again, like I said, the signs can set in even earlier. So it's not that women are protected. And I hope to cover this topic a little more, because I think this is a women's college and most of you are women here today. So we need to discuss that a little more. The other myth is that all fats are bad for the heart. Again, that should be dispelled, and cholesterol-rich foods are all very bad. So we need to find out what really the truth is. So like I said, that it's never too early to start, because we have been sort of faced with this problem. The Asian region, the South Asians in particular, we tend to have heart disease at a much earlier age than the rest of the world. And this is because of some of the genetic factors which we are endowed with. And you can see I've listed out the 9 risk factors among South Asians. I'm not going reading out each one of them, but you can see that most of it you must be knowing: the smoking, hypertension, diabetes, waist-hip ratio, all of that. We tend to have more abdominal obesity. So these are all risk factors. And this apolipoprotein A, which is very, very high, and genetically we are prone to making more of this apolipoprotein, and that is why we are more at risk. So some factors are genetic, but there are some factors which we can modifiable. So we'll talk more about what we can do. Risk factors which we can't do much about, we should be aware, but more than that, let's work on what's possible for us to do. So we start as young as 10 years, so it's never too early. And like I said, genetics does play a big part, but also the nutrition that the mother has and the intrauterine environment that is predominant when the child is being nurtured in the womb. So there is a big hypothesis that the origins of adult chronic diseases actually begins in the womb. So that is why we as nutritionists are very, very concerned about the lifestyle approach to nutrition. You just don't start nutrition at one point in the life. You should be a life course approach, and all stages of life should be dealt with. Women are at risk of CVD, and it is a fact that there are nearly as many, especially in India, women are just as much, it's just as high, the risk. And we have unique risk factors because of the hormonal changes that we go through. And factors like smoking, hypertension, high cholesterol are same for both men and women, but smoking and diabetes affects women in a more damaging way. So we are not alike and we are more vulnerable to these risk factors. We know that PCOS is a big problem, and especially in India. And here, these women are again at a higher risk of heart disease because they have high cholesterol and high BP mostly. And that is why these two risk factors again predispose women to greater risk. And also, I mean, there are many factors, but I have just listed two just to give you an idea about that we are just as much at risk as the men. The women are at a 1.7-fold greater incidence of experiencing depression. And this is a significant risk factor in developing heart disease. So women are at risk and we should be aware of that. The other risk factors which are usually not talked about, and I think it's become very important for children, students also to realize that sleep deprivation is a risk factor for CVD. Generally, children and teenagers, they think that it's okay, they just can make do with less sleep. But sleep should not be compromised, and getting good sleep and going through good sleep hygiene rules, which are again very important because we are looking at screens all the time. We are looking at our phones and the light that it emits disturbs our sleep. The patterns that we use for studying, for working, those are also coming in the way of good sleep. So good sleep is very important to reduce the risk. And so don't take it very easy. If you are not getting sleep, try and find out the reasons that you're not, what is the factor which is causing it. And usually it is the way we are using screens, etc., the way we are managing our time. So there is a strong link between insomnia and elevated risk of CVD. And this is why chrononutrition, that is how we distribute our calories, the time that we eat, the regularity of our meals, the fasting period, all of this has become a very important area of research. And our eating habits, where we are binging at night, not having breakfast, all of this can lead to increased risk of heart disease and obesity. Sometimes it works through obesity, sometimes it works directly by affecting the heart. Another risk factor which we all have to deal with, stress. Stress is something that we have to manage. It's part of our lives. We have to manage it well. And what I want to say about managing stress is that there is no one rule for managing stress. It can be different for different people. So you have to see what works for you. I know that very often it's said that you should meditate to bring down stress levels. But I would say meditation is not for everyone because you have to learn techniques of meditation. So maybe someone who likes to paint can use that as a stress busting or reducing stress technique. So if it's singing, painting, anything that you like to do, you should do that. Keep time, leisure time in your busy schedule to manage stress. So when cortisol levels are high, it increases many of the risk factors, and that is why you get more predisposed to heart disease. This is just to show you that how diet is an important burden that we have, and if the diet is bad, then you face more flack in terms of your heart health. So you need to look after your diet, and you can see in this slide on the left side, these were the leading causes of death and disability in the 1990s and what it is today. And you can see that again, malnutrition tops it. And when you talk about malnutrition, it's poor nutrition, not just lack of nutrition. It can be overnutrition. It can be lack of vitamins. It can be lack of minerals. It can be obesity. So malnutrition continues to be a leading cause of disease and disability. And that is why diet becomes important, whether it is for well-being or for disease prevention. This is again a slide just to tell you, these are the risk factors, as you can see on the x-axis, the tobacco, physical activity, and dietary risk. These are the risk factors, and these are divided into the global levels, India and United States. And what you can see here is that the dietary risk factors continue to be high and cause of disability, and it is a risk factor which is modifiable, and that is why we need to work on it. So I want to convince you that it is a behavioral risk factor, and that is something that's modifiable, and that is why we need to work on not just dietary factors, but also physical activity, quitting smoking. But as you can see in the graph, the dietary risk factors, especially for India, remains high. And these are over a period of time. And this is the latest one, 2016, as opposed to 1990. There might be a slight change, but it continues to be high, and continues to be high compared to even the other parts of the world. So there are many risk factors which are diet related, and blood pressure is one of them. Low fruit and vegetable intake. Low fruit and vegetable intake, although it seems like a very trivial thing, but it can make a huge difference to the risk. And that is why we need to focus on it. And there are many diets which are prescribed where the focus is on fruit and vegetable intake. And the rest you can read here. All of these are risk factors, but again, high BMI, fasting, plasma glucose, these are risk factors where you can play a role and modify it. So when we talk about diet, what happens is, although there are many things in the diet, but in connection with the heart, the first question that people tend to ask is about the fats and oils. So that is why I put it as the first item. People want to know what oil to use. Is it okay to use ghee? And should I sort of be on a low fat or fat-free diet? And will that help my heart? So just to give you an overview of this area, I want to show you that all fats are not alike, and every fat has a unique composition. And you can see saturated fat is present in coconut oil, butter, and palm oil, and the other oils like olive oil has monounsaturated fatty acid, and mustard oil, groundnut oil, rice bran oil also have different levels. But as you can see, the highest is in olive oil, and that is why it is much sought after oil. The omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are present in the oils listed here. And you can see omega-3, there are very few oils which have omega-3, and mustard oil, soybean oil being the local ones, which we tend to use more in India. Mustard and soybean is not so much used in other parts, but we do use it, which is good. And it is something that our body requires. This is another slide showing the same thing, the saturated MUFA, PUFA, omega-3, but you can see there is a ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. This ratio is also important because we do not want the oils to have too much of omega-6, and therefore the ratio of say 10:1, like you can see in olive oil, 11:1. Can you see that figure? On the extreme right, 11:1, that ratio. And you all see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that is the kind of ratio we want to look at for an oil which we can use safely, which is not harmful for the heart. So similarly, there are the oils which are good, but sometimes you need to use a combination of oils. So sometimes we say that if you're using rice bran oil, we can use some mustard oil along with it, in the sense that you use one vegetable which is cooked in mustard oil, and 2 or 3 items can be cooked in rice bran oil. So the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is important. Since we are not just talking about oils, I can't dwell too much on that, but we don't want these ratios to be skewed. So we don't want too much of a saturated fat. We don't want too much of omega-6. We can't get too much of omega-3 because that's difficult to find. Flaxseed oil has a lot of omega-3, but you cannot cook in it. So that balancing act should be there and can be done easily. So it's not just the quantity of oil, it's the quality of oil. And you should also remember that there are many foods which already have fat in it, like many of the meats have different percentages of fat in it. Dairy can have it unless it's skimmed. So you should be also aware of those items which you're already getting the fat from, which are the foods that you already have in your diet. And you should also be aware of how you're using the fat and oil. So if you're using all the fat and all the time for frying or using it at very high temperature, that should be avoided. It's okay to have fried food once in a while, but if you're going to subject that fat to always high heat, that's not something that's desirable. So that balance between saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats, which I talked about, was in olive oil, some amount in peanut and soybean oil, that balance, and there are recommendations for that. The top part is the trans fatty acids, which we do not want. And that is something, there are some foods which have, some of the meats have trans fatty acids, but those are the natural trans fatty acids. But what we produce when we heat oil or use other forms of fats, like hydrogenated fats, then we get the trans fatty acids. So the trans fatty acids tend to be everywhere, but I think with the new regulations, and in 2022, the Indian government and FSSAI is trying to bring down the levels of trans fatty acids in packaged foods and in cookies and other things which have been traditionally using trans fatty acids, so that our health is not affected. Because when we have these foods, we get in these trans fatty acids without even realizing it. Another aspect of our diet which has changed is how ultra-processed foods have become very, very integral to our lives. And these ultra-processed foods are not the same as processed foods. Processed foods are all right, but it's the ultra-processed foods which are totally different in terms of processing. They have very little food value. They have been synthesized in the labs with so much color, flavoring, preservatives. And this is a whole new subject. And this is something that we need to be just aware of, that ultra-processed foods are industrial formulations. And when you see an ultra-processed food, you should be able to recognize it. And these are industrial foods where you have a whole list of ingredients present in it. When you look at the label, whole list of ingredients which have nothing to do with nutrition. They are all to do with enhancing flavors and making it more addictive. So when you start eating a packet of one of these chips or one of these ultra-processed foods, it's very difficult to put it down. So this again is being researched, and you can see in the graph that CVD mortality has gone up with the increase use of ultra processed food, and that is why we need to be wary of it. So we need to have a real food diet, not ultra processed food. And you often hear about the Mediterranean diet, and this has been studied a lot because many of the studies have been done in that region. So the Mediterranean diet is actually a very popular diet which has been used for secondary prevention. That is, after you've had a heart attack, to prevent a recurrence, should follow the Mediterranean diet. And I just want to mention that this Mediterranean diet is not a low-fat, bland diet. Most people in India, once they have a heart attack, what they do is just give up fat totally, and it's not sustainable. They do it for some time, but then they get so fed up and get back to the usual diet. So it is not necessarily a low-fat diet, but like I said, it has to have a balance of fatty acids, and it can have the usual amount of fat. But what you need to do is have real food and not ultra-processed food. So if you're opening packets and packets of food which are already prepared and using it, whether it is many of the pre-prepared cereals, etc. You look at the labels, and if you look at the labels and you find a long list of ingredients, it's an ultra-processed food. So just having real food. I know it's getting more and more difficult with the kind of access we have to ultra-processed food, but we need to seriously think about it for prevention of heart disease. Inflammation is having a role in heart disease, and there are scores for food which have been developed, which are called the dietary inflammatory index, and many foods, and it's the fruits and vegetables which have more anti-inflammatory properties. So that is why fruits and vegetables have been the focus of attention in prevention of heart disease. So you need to eat enough of these, and you need to prevent the fats from being oxidized, which the industry is doing. They add antioxidants so that they don't get oxidized. And you will see that very often, along with lipid profiles, inflammatory markers are also being done, because inflammation is playing a role in the risk of heart disease. And we can combat it through a diet which has more of anti-inflammatory foods. So you may hear about the anti-inflammatory diet, you may hear about the DASH diet. So what I want to tell you, it is essentially the balanced diet, but like in the DASH diet, there are 10 to 13 portions of fruits and vegetables which are recommended. So it's a variation of the balanced diet, but the focus remains on different colored fruits and vegetables. And there are many other aspects like fiber, which needs to be focused on. So a balanced diet with the focus on fiber and colored fruits and vegetables. These diets are in various kinds of names: the portfolio diet, the anti-inflammatory diet, the DASH diet. These are different diets, and of course the Mediterranean diets, which are heart protective. So when CVD prevention through diet, what are the things that we should do or we already know about? Nuts. And amongst the nuts, of course, there are many kinds of nuts, but amongst the nuts, walnuts, almonds, pistachio, these are helpful nuts. You can also use seeds. So if you can't have it every day, at least five times a week, you must have it. And the dose could vary between 25 to 50 grams. And spice blends, many of the spices have been tested, and curcumin really stands out. That is the turmeric that we use. That is protective for the heart. The green leafy vegetables, they have nitrates and they bring down blood pressure. And there are many other beneficial properties. So green tea, tomato has lycopene. So if you use tomato-based products or use it as a salad every day. So all of these are protective food. So we need to focus on them. And I have written as the last point, chapati flour, chapati or rice. we are a carb loving country and we like to have our cereal and we have a lot of it. So we need to pay attention to the chapati flour. Of course, now there is enough fiber thanks to the demands that people have placed. And so that is why we no longer get atta, which is like maida. We get a coarser kind of blend. But what you can do is add some soya flour to it. You can add other kinds of legume flours, make it more wholesome, make it more fibrous. And that is how you upgrade the cereal so that it becomes more beneficial for the heart. But it is a predominantly plant-based diet that you should use for a CVD prevention. I just want to quickly touch upon the subject of fermented foods. Fermented foods are drawing the attention of all researchers and people working in this area because the way they work on a gut microbe, that is being studied, and that is one way to sort of mitigate the problem, whether it is hypertension or heart disease. And this is again a big potential that we have, use of fermented foods. We had forgotten the use of fermented foods, but it's coming back. And of course, you have probiotic preparations which are available, and these have been studied, how they reduce the risk of hypertension. And this is another paper where the microbiome was studied, and what was realized that these microbes help in blood pressure, bringing it down if we provide the right food to them. So depending on that, and here the diet used was the DASH diet. You remember I told you that 10 to 13 portions of fruits and vegetables are used in the DASH diet besides the other thing. So hypertension, I told you that CVD also encompasses all these problems, and hypertension is something that can be modifiable. I'm not talking about chronic hypertension, but when initially you realize that your blood pressure is high, there are things that you can do. One is follow the DASH diet, weight management. Like I talked about how you can make the chapati flour more sort of protein rich. So it should be plant-based protein, remove trans fats. And when we talk about hypertension, we should think about 3 of nutrients: potassium, magnesium, and calcium. When we push this up in the diet, we can reduce hypertension. So all of this, and of course, sodium, we all know we need to bring down the sodium intake. If we don't have ultra processed food and many of the packaged foods, we can bring down the sodium, and alcohol intake needs to be cut down. When we talk about many of the villains, we think about ghee, coconut oil, and egg. And I will briefly touch upon it. Ghee is something that is quite dear to Indians, and we want to have a little bit of ghee in the dal. So what I have tried to tell you in this slide is that there are beneficial properties that are there in ghee, whether it's the butyrate or some of the fatty acids that are present, like the conjugated linoleic acid is there, and there is also lauric acid. So all of this is beneficial, but there is also saturated fat in it. So you should not forget. So what happens is you read some article where you see that, oh, ghee is beneficial because it has lauric acid, and lauric acid is a good fatty acid. And some of the studies show that it can bring, because of the conjugated linoleic acid, it can bring down weight and it is less obesogenic. So one tries to overdo it. It's okay to use ghee as a part of our everyday diet, but you can use it only in the quota of saturated fatty acids. And you remember I showed you that pyramid where saturated fatty acids can be 7 to 10% of the total fat intake, and it's okay to use small amounts of ghee in the everyday diet. and get the benefit of it, but don't overdo it. Similarly, for coconut oil, again, it is calorie dense, it has a lot of saturated fat, and it can be disturbing if you start using too much of coconut oil. So here again, the advice is that if you're using saturated fat, your quota is 10% of the calories. So in general, you can keep it, the saturated fat, less than 1 tablespoon if there's no other saturated fat. If you're using a lot of meats, they will be having already saturated, then it can't be 1 tablespoon. You'll have to reduce it. Eggs have done a lot of flip-flop, and for very long time, they have been seen as villains because of the cholesterol content that they have. They are almost 185 milligrams of cholesterol in one egg. So many of the studies show that they were a risk for cardiovascular disease. But in 2020, after a lot of systematic reviews and new data that came in, it's now okay to eat eggs because eggs have many other good things. It's not just about cholesterol, it is about the other sources of nutrients that it has. So it is a package of nutrition that you get from eggs. It's not just cholesterol. So even the guidelines for cholesterol have changed, dietary cholesterol. So it's okay to use eggs as a part of the healthy diet. And even people who are diabetic or have high cholesterol can include it in the diet. But again, you cannot go overboard with it. Like if there are certain bodybuilders, etc., who want to have 15, 20 eggs in a day, that is not a recommendation. So 1 egg per day is definitely okay. Very often I'm asked this question that we have heard that alcohol is protective for the heart. So you may have seen studies which show that, but it's at this point of time, it cannot be a recommendation for people who do not drink that you should start drinking to get the benefit. There are other ways that you can get the benefit that certain studies have shown, like red wine drinkers have shown some benefit. But this is not advised to add red wine to your diet if you're not having red wine. Instead, you can have many of the fruits which have the resveratrol present in it, like the red grapes, pomegranate, beetroot. So any of those drinks, you can make healthy drinks with such foods and get the benefit. So you can exercise, and that will also boost your HDL cholesterol levels. So you don't have to drink wine, but the data shows that it's okay if you stay within the limits of alcohol, which the guidelines say. But when you take excess, that causes acute inflammation, and that is an absolute no-no, because that increases the reactive oxygen species when alcohol is metabolized. And there's another pathway through the gut microbes, which again mimics a bacterial infection and create an inflammatory response. So overdoing alcohol is an absolute no-no. And those who do take red wine or alcohol have to stay within the limits of 2 drinks for men and 1 for women, no more than that. There are many supplements which are talked about, whether it's folic acid, omega-3 supplements, and in Ayurveda, you have Arjun bark in various formulations. But what I want to tell you about supplements, that even supplements can carry this because they are high doses. So do not pop in supplements without really knowing what really is needed. So even if it is, say, folic acid supplements, which is kind of benign, but there have been many studies with many of the vitamins and minerals in overdoses, which can be harmful. So take it when it is prescribed, don't pop in supplements, because the data does not show as of now that these supplements are meant for everyone for prevention. They may be there for treatments, but for prevention, get it from the food, get it from the diet. You can get folic acid from green leafy vegetables. They are one of the most widely available, and sometimes we waste them so much because we throw away the leaves of many of these edible foods. So don't take it for prevention. For treatment, it will be prescribed, but for prevention, get it through the diet. This is just to explain how omega-3 fats work. They have an anti-inflammatory effect. They also stabilize the plaques that are formed in the arteries. But omega-3 can be had through the diet. Of course, they are more through fatty fish, but they are vegetarian sources. You can get it through dals, green leafy vegetables, many of the seeds and nuts. So get them into the diet. So we need to converge our thinking, whether it is Ayurveda or modern science, and that is why we need to think of the whole body as such, not just the heart. And I just wanted to mention oil pulling, where you sort of, I do not know if any one of you have tried this, that there are sachets available of, say, coconut oil or any of the where you sort of swish it around in your mouth to alter the bacterial flora. And because oral flora again is connected to heart disease, and therefore you begin by keeping your mouth clean, you should floss it, keep your dental hygiene in place. So it begins right in the mouth, and even the liver is connected to the heart. So it's not just the heart working by itself. And what I want to emphasize here is just the fact that we have focused too much on fats, but we also now need to focus on reducing our sugar intake, and particularly the high fructose corn syrup, which you may find in many packaged food, which causes the liver to turn on the cholesterol producing factory. Cholesterol is also made in the liver. So when you have a lot of this, the cholesterol making switch is turned on. And that is why we need to not just focus on fats, we also need to focus on having complex carbohydrates, or not having too much of refined carbohydrates, which get converted into sugar, and that causes high triglycerides and cholesterol. So prevention is key, and there is a lot that we can do. Of course, we eat a lot of carbohydrates. I do not tell anyone to go off carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are essential for our well-being, but we need to see the quality, make it complex, have as much fiber added to it. If you can add some isabgol husk, or you add any of the chokers or bran, make it more complex. Portion size, we need to, sometimes we overdo the carbohydrates, so we can cut down the portion size. And don't think about foods like I talked about eggs just being cholesterol bombs. They are not cholesterol bombs, they are whole foods. So don't think about one nutrient, think about the entire package of the food that you're having. Sugary drinks, it's very easy to gulp down a glass of sugary drinks. So we need to watch the sugary drinks that we have, cut it down, and don't think that just because you cut down the sugar, the artificial sweeteners will take care of obesity. Now there is more data to show that there could be problems with artificial sweeteners. So take it in moderation if you have to, don't overdo it. Watching weight, insulin levels, and glucose levels are important for heart health. And like I said, we love the dhuli hui dals and we love refined food. So try and have as much fiber as possible. Don't peel fruits and vegetables if they are edible. Try and have it in that form. And even without doing very expensive tests, you can find out the blood picture and generally take stock of the situation. this is just to tell you what is new. A new tool has been developed for coronary heart disease reduction, and that will assess your diet pattern, and hopefully this should be out soon. So next time when you go to a dietitian, they can assess more objectively what your diet is and give you some kind of very sort of precise figures as to what you should do. So making it more objective, this tool will help in reduction of heart disease. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful session. But I'm sure our participants must be having a few doubts or queries. So please, I request all our participants to post any queries, any doubts, or any questions you want to ask. Please post that in the chat box, and we'll be taking up all the questions one by one. Or if anybody wants to ask their questions personally, you can please raise your hand and you can have a word with the doctor.
आप में से कोई भी चाहे वो डायरेक्ट भी मैम से प्रश्न पूछ सकता है। हमने अनम्यूट करने की व्यवस्था दे रखी है।
नमस्कार मैम।
नमस्ते।
मैं मनीषा हूँ और मैं आपसे ये जानना चाह रही हूँ कि आपने जो भी डाइट प्लान बताए हैं और जो भी खान पान की व्यवस्था बताई है वो एक नॉर्मल ह्यूमन बीइंग के लिए बताई है जिसका कोई भी सर्जरी नहीं हुआ और कोई जिसको प्रॉब्लम नहीं है वो पहले से इसको फॉलो करके हेल्दी रह सकता है। बट जिनका कोई सर्जरी, जैसे मेरा गॉल ब्लैडर रिमूव हो चुका है, तो मेरे लिए क्या कुछ स्पेशल टिप्स बता सकती हैं कि कैसे ऑयल, बेसिकली ऑयल के पर्पस, मतलब ऑयल कैसे खाना है?
ऐसा मनीषा आपने बताया ना अपना नाम?
जी मैम।
हाँ मनीषा, ये जो टॉपिक था, ये डाइट जो है वो कैसे प्रिवेंट कर सकता है, दैट वाज द फोकस। ट्रीटमेंट के लिए अलग अलग बातें करनी होंगी। सो दिस वाज फॉर प्रिवेंशन। और गॉल ब्लैडर जब रिमूव होता है तो गॉल ब्लैडर क्या काम करता है वो हम देखते हैं कि उसमें स्टोरेज होता है, जो बाइल बनता है डाइजेशन के लिए, फैट्स के लिए, वो उसमें स्टोर होता है और जब हम खाना खाते हैं तो धीरे धीरे वो निकल करके डाइजेशन में हेल्प करता है। तो 2-3 टिप्स ये हैं कि आप जो भी है एक साथ बहुत हैवी खाना नहीं खाएंगे, मतलब स्मॉल फ्रीक्वेंट मील्स खाएं और बहुत फ्राइड फूड नहीं खाना है। इसके अलावा जो है, मतलब अदरवाइज जो आप फ्रूट, वेजिटेबल्स, दाल्स हैं, ये सब में कोई रोक टोक नहीं है। इट्स मोर अबाउट द फ्रीक्वेंसी विद विच यू ईट स्मॉलर मील्स, क्योंकि ये जो बाइल है वो आता रहेगा, उसको स्टोर होने की जगह नहीं है। सो इट्स बेटर टू हैव मोर फ्रीक्वेंट मील्स rather than having very large big meals at one time, and too much fat at one time won't get digested. आपको थोड़ा डायरिया हो जाएगा अगर आप बहुत ज्यादा एक साथ खाएंगी फैटी चीजें। तो गॉल ब्लैडर, इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल टू कवर ऑल एलिमेंट्स और हर का अपना यूनिक सिचुएशन होता है। सो दिस वाज मोर अबाउट प्रिवेंशन। हम प्रिवेंशन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। हम अगर एक बार हार्ट डिजीज हो जाए तो आप उसकी इकोनॉमिक सोचिए, डिसेबिलिटी सोचिए, और कितना मतलब उसको लेके खर्चा होता है, हॉस्पिटल जाना होता है, कितनी चीजें करनी होती हैं। तो प्रिवेंशन इज इम्पोर्टेंट, ऑल्दो आई थिंक इन द यंगर एज ग्रुप प्रिवेंशन को उतनी महत्व नहीं दिया जाता है।
जी मैम, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपका। बहुत ही मुझे एकदम समझ में आ गया और ये मुझे रिलेट हो रहा है क्योंकि मैंने ऐसा महसूस किया कि जब भी मैं बहुत हल्का खाती हूँ, थोड़ा सा खाती हूँ, तो मैं एनर्जेटिक फील करती हूँ और अच्छा फील करती हूँ। लेकिन अगर ज्यादा हैवी खा लेती हूँ तो मुझे लगता है जैसे मैं थकावट सा, नींद आने लगती है, मतलब फिजिकली बहुत लो फील करने लगती हूँ।
हाँ, क्योंकि वो डाइजेस्ट नहीं हो पा रहा है तो इसलिए ये सिम्टम्स हो सकते हैं। तो आप फ्रीक्वेंसी बढ़ा सकती हैं अपने, इंस्टेड ऑफ 3 heavy meals you can make it 6 small meals.
थैंक यू मैम, थैंक यू सो मच।
नमस्ते मैम, मैं रमा वेंकटेश बोल रही हूँ। मुझे ये पूछना था कि दही और पनीर सब खा सकते हैं क्या? इज इट एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी और
Yes,
does it help? Excuse me, does it help in जो
प्रिवेंशन?
cardiovascular?
हाँ बिल्कुल, दही और पनीर लिया जा सकता है, बट उसका सोर्स आपको देखना पड़ेगा कि वो फुल फैट मिल्क का मत बनाइए। जैसे जो पनीर आप बनाएं तो आप उसको लो फैट मिल्क का बनाइए, क्योंकि हमारे डाइट में सैचुरेटेड फैट कम करना है और मिल्क में, पनीर में सैचुरेटेड फैट होता है। तो इसलिए अगर आप सोर्स उसका जो बनाएंगी लो फैट मिल्क से बनाएंगी तो सैचुरेटेड फैट ज्यादा नहीं होगा डाइट में, एंड दैट इज फाइन।
थैंक यू मैम, थैंक यू मैम, थैंक यू।
अच्छा 1 मिनट, दही का क्या रोल है? दही
हाँ, दही
खाना
दही
चाहिए या
हाँ,
उसे पानी मिला के पीना है? मतलब उसको एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी मान लीजिए
हाँ
बॉडी
बिल्कुल।
आर्थराइटिस जो लोग हैं वे लोग इसको खाने से प्रिवेंशन बोलते हैं, और ये हार्ट के लिए ये कुछ खराब करे या डाइजेशन में सपोर्ट करता है कि उसके बारे में थोड़ा कंफ्यूजन है।
हाँ, क्योंकि आज हम हार्ट डिजीज के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, और व्हाट आई लाइक अबाउट योर क्वेश्चन इज कि किसी को हार्ट डिजीज के साथ साथ अगर हम प्रिवेंट कर रहे हैं, साथ में आर्थराइटिस हो सकती है, और उसके लिए एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी डाइट में दही हो सकता है। इट्स जस्ट दैट it should be fresh in the sense that बहुत स्टेल दही नहीं हो, but it can be fresh, और वो gut microbes जो हैं they like these fermented foods. तो दही का आप यूज करें, use low fat milk for setting the dahi and make it part of the diet, but use low fat milk too, and that has anti-inflammatory role. So people with arthritis can also have dahi, but एक तो आप थोड़ा उसका मतलब फ्रेशनेस का, टेम्परेचर का ख्याल रखें, अदरवाइज इट कैन बी पार्ट ऑफ इट।
मेनली फैट फ्री होना चाहिए, सो
फैट फ्री, लो फैट,
लो
लो
फैट। ओके,
थैंक यू, थैंक यू।
Ma'am, we have received a few queries from our participants. So, सबसे पहला question ये है मैम कि is ghee a good fat or a bad fat?
I think I had devoted one slide for it. Ghee has many good elements in it, but what human beings require is not a full ghee wala, fat wala diet. We need some unsaturated fatty acids also. So ghee can be part of the diet, should be part of the diet. Please आप डालिए घी, आप दाल में डालिए या रोटी पे लगाइए, आप एक आइटम चूज कर लीजिए and make it part of the diet, but don't start cooking everything in ghee. That wouldn't be good.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. And we have another question. That Mediterranean diet includes 10 to 13.
Yeah, that's
Niharika.
Mediterranean diet. इसीलिए उनको हम अडेप्ट करके इंडियन डाइट के लिए मेडिटेरेनियन डाइट को हम एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी बनाते हैं। 10 to 13 exchanges हम लोग नहीं खा, the Mediterranean people are able to eat it because they have grown up eating like that, but our fruit and vegetable intake is very poor, but we should aim for at least 5 to 7 in a day. So that, and one portion is half a cup. So we should at least try to have that much. उससे ज़्यादा हो तो benefit ज़्यादा होता है. So it is up to you. You can substitute some of the foods that you're having with more of fruits and vegetables. So it is a substitution या swapping की आप कुछ वो भावना रख करके करेंगे तो वो हो सकता है. But I know that is why I don't recommend the Mediterranean diet, but I'm telling you that lots of studies have been done and that has been beneficial.
Hello, ma'am. I just want to know the use of oil. How much should we use, and what type of oil we should have? Oil.
हाँ हाँ, मैं समझ गई. ऑयल मैंने बताया आपको कि ऑयल में फैटी एसिड्स होते हैं और हर ऑयल डिफरेंट होता है. तो अगर आप मुझे बता रही हैं, आप बताएंगे कि आप यूजुअली कौन सा ऑयल यूज करती हैं, बिकॉज इट्स अ वास्ट टॉपिक एंड आई डोंट नो वेयर टू स्टार्ट. इट्स नॉट दैट देयर इज वन गुड ऑयल और बस उसके अलावा आप और कोई ऑयल मत यूज कीजिए. देयर आर सर्टेन ऑयल्स विच आर जनरली गुड, और उसमें मैं आपको बता सकती हूँ, जैसे कि अगर आप ऑलिव ऑयल है, मस्टर्ड ऑयल है, सेसमी ऑयल है, सोयाबीन ऑयल है, दीज आर गुड ऑयल इन द सेंस दैट दे हैव अ गुड प्रोफाइल. अगर किसी का आपका प्रोफाइल अच्छा है, so people want to be with you or want you in their organization. So similarly, if the oil ka profile अच्छा होता है, so we want to put it in our diet. So these are generally the oils which are considered healthy oils, and it's a very complicated topic. So in the sense that supposing you're using sunflower oil, and sunflower oil has too much of omega-6 फैटी एसिड्स, तो उसको कम करने के लिए हम कहेंगे आप कोई ऐसा ऑयल साथ में यूज कीजिए जिसमें कि थोड़ा सा N6 का रेशियो N3 भी आ जाए. तो थोड़ा मस्टर्ड ऑयल आप यूज कर लीजिए, जैसे 2 चीजों में मस्टर्ड ऑयल यूज कर लीजिए, 4 चीजों में आप सनफ्लावर ऑयल यूज कीजिए. तो इस तरह से आप बैलेंस ऑफ फैटी एसिड्स मेंटेन कर सकते हैं. ठीक है. Yes, rice bran oil is safe, and I showed it on my slide. It's one of the good oils that you can use.
Okay, ma'am. I think there's one question, थोड़ा सा incomplete है, but I'll just try it. That 2018 में मेरा bypass surgery हुआ है and weight is 48 kgs. काफी कमजोरी लगती है. डॉक्टर बरिंदर कुमार ने लिखा है. I think he must be wanting to know कि कैसे वो कुछ
So it's very difficult to give this kind of advice on this kind of platform, because this is a therapeutic diet. So it's better अगर वो जहाँ भी जा रहे हैं अपना चेकअप कराने के लिए, एक बार अपना डाइट रिव्यू करें, और फिर उसमें जो कुछ लैकिंग माइक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट है या फिर चेंज इन दी मैक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट्स की, प्रोटीन बढ़ाना है, फैट कम करना है. So I will not deal with therapeutic diets on this platform because it's a very specific, personalized thing.
मैम हमारा भी एक
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. जी, please.
Somebody wants to ask. Somebody wants to ask, please go ahead.
मैम हमारे ये क्वेश्चन है कि मैम जब भी ठंड शुरू होते है मैम मुझे ज्यादा टाइम सर्दी जुकाम हो जाता है और मैम गर्मी आते फिर ठीक हो जाता है, इसके लिए मैं क्या कर सकती हूँ?
ठंड में सर्दी जुकाम होता है?
यस मैम, ठंड में सर्दी जुकाम हो जाता है और गर्मी में भी ठीक हो जाता है अपने आप.
तो ये हो सकता है कि आप थोड़ा ससेप्टेबल हैं जो कोल्ड वेदर है, उसके लिए आप ऐसा कर सकती हैं, हॉट फ्लूइड्स ज्यादा लें. जब भी आपको ठंड लगती है ना, तो गरम वाले फ्लूइड्स, चाहे आप उसको ग्रीन टी बनाएं या सूप्स बना करके. इससे क्या होगा कि जो भी इन्फ्लेमेशन वगैरह है और नेजल ट्रैक वगैरह में जो थोड़ा इन्फ्लेमेशन है, वो थोड़ा सा आप उसको कम कर सकती हैं. और इम्यूनिटी बढ़ाने के लिए अगेन यू शुड हैव मोर फ्रूट्स एंड वेजिटेबल्स थ्रू द ईयर. मतलब ये नहीं कि गर्मी में ठीक हो गया तो फिर आप फ्रूट्स वेजिटेबल्स खाना बंद कर दें. सैलेड के फॉर्म में आप लेते रहें इवन इन द समर्स, बिकॉज इसका इफेक्ट जो है विंटर में भी रहेगा. तो ये आप करते रहें.
थैंक यू मैम.
Okay, so Prachi, I'll have to leave now, and
thank you so much for giving us your time. और इसमें आई एम वेरी श्योर दैट वी हैव ऑल benefited by your talks. And see, we know these things basically. Most of us follow a layman's approach. We would not see saturated, unsaturated. We do hear about these jargons are there, but basically जो हमारी अप्रोच होती है ना कि बस सिंपली फ्रूट्स खाने हैं, तो somebody is eating apple तो एप्पल ही खाएगा वो। तो आप कह रहे हैं डिफरेंट कलर्ड के कलर की
डाइवर्सिटी होनी चाहिए अब।
डाइवर्सिटी।
हाँ, डाइवर्सिटी बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है। और ये होना चाहिए कि आप अगर सोच रहे हैं एप्पल इज अ हेल्दी फ्रूट और मैं रोज एप्पल खाती हूँ, यू गेट डिफरेंट माइक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट्स फ्रॉम डिफरेंट फ्रूट्स। जितने कलर्स आप इंक्लूड, जितनी वैरायटी करें वो बहुत अच्छा रहेगा।
Right. And the same goes, for the oil also. Because most houses, most household will be using just one type of oil. This is my feeling is एक ले लिया बस वही use होगा in at least cooking. Plus, there may be some ghee. Ghee को तो अब लोग काफी दोबारा से they have come back to the ghee. कि ghee तो बीच में तो ये हो गया तो कहते हैं कि no ghee at all. वैसे घी की जो उसकी प्रॉपर्टीज है वो हमारे जॉइंट्स के लिए, जैसे इट्स गुड फॉर द जॉइंट्स and maybe other properties.
बहुत सारी चीजें हैं. I showed in the slide, it does have some anti-inflammatory property, but you cannot overdo it, because then you will face the problems that overuse से होता है. So that is something that you need to just more of moderation and balance.
देखते हैं अब बाकी जितने भी यहाँ पे हमारे पास व्यूअर्स हैं कितने लोग अब उसको फॉलो करेंगे. दैट विल बी वेरी नाइस इफ we try and incorporate your advices and improve our diets. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope we continue these kinds of talks with you more. And प्रमोद जी, आप सबको एक बार और आप मैम को जरा जरूर अपनी भाषा.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here. So I hope that we stay connected. So, bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, and thank you all the.
Thank you.
चलिए प्रमोद जी, आप जरा इसको लिंक दे दीजिए सब लोगों को, so that they all get the certificate. Have you already given? आपने दे दिया है क्या?
जी मैम, बिल्कुल.
हाँ जी मैम.
लिंक ग्रुप में भेजा जा चुका है. आप सभी से आग्रह है कि आप लोग फीडबैक भी भरें, और साथ ही एक निवेदन यह भी है कि अपने वीडियोस ऑन कर लें जो लोग यहाँ विद्यमान हैं.
वीडियो ऑन कर ले, एक ग्रुप फोटोग्राफ ले लेते हैं.
हाँ,
प्लीज एवरीवन, डोंट लीव लाइक दिस. प्लीज गो अहेड. प्रमोद जी, मेरे स्क्रीन पे पूरा नहीं आ रहा है सबका.
नहीं आ रहा है मैम. वो व्यू में जा करके ना दाहिने साइड में देखिए, ऊपर दिया होगा, उसको आप गैलरी व्यू कर लीजिए, सब दिखेंगे. आपने ना स्पीकर किया होगा या इस तरह से कुछ. हाँ,
Yes, I get it. I get it.
अभी बहुत सारे लोग हैं और मुझे लगता है ना कि अभी ये लोग ऐसे ही आ गए हैं, वीडियो मतलब फोटो खिंचाने के मूड में नहीं है. प्लीज आप लोग थोड़ा सा सहयोग करें. जी देखिए, शिवम कुमार पांडे जी जिस तरह से हंस रहे हैं उसी तरह से चेहरे पे मुस्कुराहट होनी चाहिए. हाँ, हिमांशी जी,
सारे लोग.
वीरेंद्र जी हैं, सर हैं, बीएस बागला सर भी दिख रहे हैं. सर नमस्ते, प्रणाम सर.
वो शायद मामा के पास किसी काम से गए.
हाँ. ओके, थैंक यू सो मच. बहुत ही बढ़िया, बहुत सारगर्भित व्याख्यान रहा मैम का. संक्षिप्त लेकिन बहुत ही व्यवस्थित उन्होंने अपनी बातों को रखा. और अब ये आप लोगों को सूचना दे दें कि अब हम लोगों का जो हेल्थ एंड हाइजीन कमेटी है वो हेल्थ से रिलेटेड वेबिनारों का सीरीज पुनः लेकर के इस साल के लिए भी आ चुका है. ये मुझे लग रहा है कि संप्रति इस साल का ये पहला वेबिनार है. मैम सही है हम?
हाँ जी बिल्कुल. एंड नेक्स्ट इज गोइंग टू बी ऑर्थोपेडिक्स पे, आई केयर, सब कुछ, एवरीथिंग इज इन द पाइपलाइन. आप लोग सब लोग आइए, सब जुड़िए इसके साथ.
हाँ बिल्कुल. आर्थो, जैसा कि आप समझ रहे हैं कि आर्थोपेडिकली जो समस्याएं हैं, अस्थि से संबंधित बहुत सारी होती हैं, दर्द इत्यादि, उनको लेकर के अगला वेबिनार मैम ने प्लान कर रखा है. उसमें अवश्य आए और हमारा मार्गदर्शन करें, उत्साहवर्धन करें. आज का वेबिनार अब यहीं समाप्त होता है, फिर हम लोग अगले वेबिनार में मिलेंगे. तब तक के लिए आप सभी को नमस्कार, धन्यवाद. थैंक यू सो मच.
थैंक यू सो मच.
Thank you, sir.